It's Friday, June 23rd, 2023. Show-centric episode where my wife Samantha has come back to join us again. Hello, Sam.
Hi.
We're going to talk about, as we've kind of done the last few times, we're going to talk about one show that we actually just finished watching. What did you finish? Last night? Last night.
Last night.
Last night.
Last night.
And it's a show that we mentioned, I think, when we did the first one, that at some point we were going to do, and the timing worked out. So we're now going to talk about the, what year was this on? 2016 series called The Good Place, which ran for 4 seasons on NBC. It's currently on Netflix. Now, the way streaming stuff is, by the time this comes out, even it's just going to be a couple weeks from now, who knows? It could evaporate because now we're in a streaming hell where you never know where anything is and stuff jumps around. So at the moment, it's on Netflix. Actually, I could tell you where it is. Hold on a minute. Because one of the few things IMDb has done that's actually benefit now, it is just Netflix, or you can rent it on Prime. So right now, you can only watch it on Netflix. So that is where you can watch it, or you can rent it in other places, I'm sure. But that's what we're going to be talking about this evening. So my wife is a huge fan of this show, so I'm actually going to let her explain what it is and what it's about and everything about it. So, Sam, what is The Good Place for anybody who has heard of it or never heard of it but doesn't know anything about it?
If you haven't seen this show yet and you intend to, I wouldn't listen to this until you have, because there are a lot of things that we're going to be talking about that will be spoilers. Like Joe and I talked about this earlier, and he said that, if by now maybe people won't ever watch it, and, so it's not spoiling anything. But if you have the desire to watch it and you haven't yet, watch it first before you listen to this, because I totally was taken back by this show and what happens in it. So I don't want to ruin that for anybody else. But the premise basically is there are 4 people that are died. And so they go to the good place. And Kristen Bell's character, Eleanor Shellstrop, realizes that, like, first thing, she's not supposed to be there. Ted Danson plays Michael, who's like the head of the neighborhood. And I'm not trying to, like, I don't know how to run this show down without saying how it starts. So I'm not going to try to talk about the entire show, but this is how it starts. So he talks about her accomplishments, and early on she's like, whoa, I'm not supposed to be here. She's hooked up with, she's told that Chidi is her soulmate, and he was a professor of ethics. So her plan was to, maybe he can teach her how to be a better person, so she belongs in the good place and she doesn't have to go to the bad place. Um, am I missing anything?
No, I don't think so. I mean, that's the basic setup for, within the
Yeah,
first couple episodes. I think the first episode, how quickly does she tells Chidi what before the end of the first
right
episode?
away.
Certainly, yeah,
Oh yeah,
yeah,
like she's
yeah.
like, oh hey, you're my soulmate. You'll do anything for me.
Oh,
Okay,
right,
boom.
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
not
yeah, yeah.
supposed to be
Yes,
here.
yes. She immediately says, "Do you promise that you will never do anything to harm me or whatever?" And he's like, "Oh no, of course I promise." She's like, "Oh good, because I'm not supposed to be here." And then he's kind of screwed. And
Yeah,
Chidi's character is a professor of ethics and moral philosophy. And so the show has this very clever thing with him where he is, at least for the majority of the show, completely trapped within his ethical morals. So if he knows he can help somebody, he must by default, not because he's being forced to by some kind of supernatural force, but by his own way of looking at the world, he is forced to help that person pretty much no matter what, except if it comes at the expense of somebody else's happiness. I think it's the only thing that he'll stop with, but everything else he's basically obligated. If you come to him and say, I need your help, he basically has to help you. And that's, what ends up for
and
the most of
he's
the first season, why he's helping Eleanor, even though she is a monstrous person at times.
and his character is so plagued by indecision that even the tiniest of choices just sets him off, like gives him a stomach ache, and he just can't make any choice because he's plagued by if it's the wrong choice.
Yeah, so at the end, just to jump to what the big twist of the first season is, because this will explain what the first season, as we go through it, is the twist is that, in fact, because there's four main characters. There's Eleanor, Chidi, Tahani, and Jason. And the four of them are all actually people who, through various... Eleanor's the one who's the most classically, quote-unquote, bad, in that she's rude to people, she's selfish, she actively does terrible things to her friends. So she's the classic example of who you would expect to go to hell, or whatever, the bad place is what they call it.
Mm-hmm.
The rest of them are... I mean, Jason is not really... He's ignorantly bad. He doesn't
He's a
really...
dingbat.
Yeah, he doesn't understand what he's doing. He's portrayed as a doofus. Chidi is, his badness is the most sort of debatable. The way that they explain why he's there because of his indecision, as the show goes on, it starts getting into the idea that the way people are judged doesn't work at all. So that becomes a later thing in the show. But at least the way it starts out, because none of that comes in the first season. His reason for being there is because he can't make a decision, and it harmed everybody around him. He seems to think it's because of almond milk, which is a running gag, that he thinks that the reason he's in the bad place is because he drank almond milk, even though he knew it was bad for the environment. The fact that he only thinks, that he sees that as being that evil is kind of one of the funny quirks of the character. And then Tahani, everything she did was essentially corrupt because it wasn't actually because she ran lots of fundraisers and raised lots of money for people, but it was all because she essentially wanted to show up her sister, who was far more famous and more loved than she was. Although again, as it goes on, you start to figure out that that's because their parents were messed up. So it really wasn't the way it's set up at first. You think her sister is a really mean and selfish person, but in fact, they were both made into this by the fact that their parents were not good parents. But that's all later. Right. So essentially the first season is the big twist is that Ted Danson is in fact a demon, and that this entire thing is an experiment because he's essentially become bored with how the bad place tortures people. And he's trying to set up a system where 4 people, because they're the only 4 humans, everybody else is a demon, and Janet, who's essentially a robot. I mean, she's not, but she is.
She's like a person of like Siri or Alexa. Yes. Like she's like a database of all knowledge.
Yeah, a personified
you say Janet and
database.
she just appears. Yeah, right.
And so the idea was to have these 4 people all torture each other for however long. And so the idea was to make them do it without knowing it, but to set these 4 people in a way that they would all torture each other. And so that was the basic premise of the first season. And then the show changes. Every season becomes a little different. But the first season is really just about ethics and different ways of looking at the world. And it's really just a way for Chidi to keep explaining all these different ways that human beings can be good or bad, and the fact that there are moral positions that are sometimes in conflict. There are classic moral questions like the trolley problem is a whole episode, which is a very famous ethical kind of dilemma, which is probably one of my favorite episodes, is the trolley one. Not just of season 1, but of the entire thing. I think that is one of the best episodes. Season 1 is probably my favorite season. I honestly, I think the middle of the show, I kind of wish the show was a season shorter than it was. I realized that when we rewatched it. It's a little too long for me. Because I think the middle, it takes too long. I think that the first season and the last season are excellent. I think the middle is a little padded. I actually started to fall asleep this time watching it, which I've never done on most of our shows. I was actually kind of nodding off in season 2 and 3. I think it just goes a little too far. Yeah. I mean, you like this show a little bit more than me, I have to admit. I think this show is, without a doubt, it is one of the best written shows we've ever seen in terms of a modern show.
Yeah.
It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. It knows what its ending is. It's very clear. They knew exactly where they were going with it. So I think the ending is, unlike a lot of shows when we talk about shows that go too long, this is another one that knew exactly where it was going to end. I think that's great. But to me, the first season is very good, and the last season is very good, although I have problems with the last season, but we'll get to that. I realized I have a major problem with something that happens in the last season, but maybe it's just my problem. But the first season, I think, is a perfect season of television. I think that you had asked me, did I have any indication that the twist was going to be that they were in the bad place? None. I didn't pick up anything.
I didn't either.
No. The only reason I knew about it before we finished the season is I think I saw something on Twitter where somebody mentioned how great a twist it was. And that was the only reason I knew anything. But honestly, without that, I would not have known until we got to it. And you've been listening to the podcast that they did on it. You've finished the first season, you said, of it, right? The first
I
season?
did, yeah.
And there's a number of things they do that are very intentional to hide that. And since you're listening to it, I'm going to let you explain it, because I think it is, again, I had no idea. Some people are going to say, oh, I figured it out episode 2. Well, then you're far smarter than me. I didn't figure it out. So
I didn't either. And so, yeah, this podcast that I'm listening to, they actually did it. The character who plays Sean, who basically, I don't know if, not necessarily the devil, but he runs the bad place, essentially. And so he hosts it, which is so funny because he has this voice. His voice doesn't change. So when you hear it in the show, he sounds like sinister and he's evil, but then he's hosting this podcast and he's like, oh, do something good and everything is great, and it's just very funny. But so they basically take, if you like this show, if you're a fan of the show, I definitely recommend listening to it, because they take every episode is on like an episode of the show, and each episode they bring on a variety of people involved in the show. It could be different writers, it's Kristen Bell, it's, all the actors, it's Mike Schur who created the show, Morgan Sackett, like all of the people that were involved. Talk to the costume designer, and they get all of these different insights and what went into the show, which I really like. I really like the Easter eggs and the technical, and then you learn in listening to this how much detail is in this. I mean, everything is thought about. Like, there's different things that, if they'll pop up a thing on the screen really quick that tells you how many points you earn or lose from what you did on Earth. I mean, all of that shit is there. If they had to write like a book or a paper. Like that shit was written, not just like words on a page that don't mean anything. I mean, the writers actually like wrote stuff that nobody will ever see. It's just, I think they just had so much fun with the show. And again, I think this is what Mike Schur creates, because he has this, in listening to the first season of the podcast, because I've already listened to it, but I started re-listening to it. But there were so many people involved that all they had to do was hear that it was a Mike Schur show. That's all they needed to hear. And they're like, yep, I'm in. A few people that so far, I don't know how many, but just the ones that I've listened to, like were living in New York, had an opportunity to do a Mike Schur show. Like, yep, I'll move to LA. Like, so I think that because he has such a reputation of the good stuff that he creates, that everybody was just hearing that he was involved. And NBC basically went to him. I was like, you want to do a show? Here, just do it. Like, just gave him free license to do whatever the hell he wanted, which is pretty cool. I think, that pulls a lot of weight. And he has like a no ego, no asshole policy. Best idea wins. And I think he just creates such a unique and cool environment that they just, have so much fun writing and being involved in the show, that and the content that's created is just so, it shows that, I think.
And they had what was the name of the ethicist? Remember the name of the guy? The person who was the advisor?
Todd May. They brought in all these people. So, because he was very interested in, Mike Schur was very interested in ethics. So they brought in these professors and to basically like give the writers and them like, not like school, but kind of, because it was just, they really wanted them to be, because they touch on a lot of philosophy. And so they really wanted them to know their shit, because like they said in the podcast, anything you put out there, the internet is going to destroy you in 2 seconds if it's not legit. So they made sure like this shit holds up and they know exactly what they're talking about.
It probably helped that he was he was involved very heavily in The Office, the American version, which did very well. He was part of Parks and Rec, and Parks and Rec was not a big rating success, but it was very popular critically and it had a fan base. So it makes sense that NBC would say, okay, what do you want to do? He's also involved in Brooklyn Nine-Nine, which I think just ended, or a couple of years ago, whatever it was. So it makes sense that they would come to him and say, we'll trust what you want to do. The interesting part that you had told me was that they had filmed the twist ending of season 1 without knowing there would be a season 2, which is just lunacy.
Yep.
And because the twist of season 1 is, of course, that, they're in the bad place. And so if there had been no season 2, something that very frequently happens on things like Netflix and Amazon and other streaming services, where they will film a first season with a cliffhanger and then decide to just shove a bowling ball up your backside and say, yeah, no, it's not going to end. Thanks. And then you're just screwed, which I've fallen for that multiple times. It's, the fact that they did this, even if they didn't know, they had to have an idea that they would at least be able to do some kind of movie or something. Because otherwise, that's a terrible way to leave a series.
Yeah.
Or they just had enough confidence, in what they were doing.
Yeah, I forgot to mention, I went off on a tangent about Mike Schur, but we started talking about it. So they knew Kristen Bell and Ted Danson. He told them about the twist, or first on. And then, the writers obviously knew, because they needed everything to be cohesive and leading up to. And they had very strict rules on, like, you never see Ted Danson by himself. He never wears red. I don't think anybody in The Good Place wears red. So there's all these things that you wouldn't even think about, but they didn't even want to, like, hint that they were in the bad place. So the writers knew a very, very small amount of people involved in the show actually knew the twist. So they had, guest directors. The guest directors didn't know. And so they actually, like, they had almost code words for, like, what they talked about it with Ted Danson, that he would, like, ask about, like, a direction, but he actually wouldn't even talk to the director. He would talk to, like, the executive producer or whatever, who knew. And it, I can't remember what the words were, but it was something like, oh, okay, well, is this good for the show, like for the episode, or like for the whole thing? I don't remember. They had like code words to, like, because is this gonna be okay, so it can line up with the bigger picture. But they had to be so secretive about everything. And then they had a meeting with the 4 other actors who played Janet, Jason, Tahani, and Chidi. They didn't know either until I think they told them, maybe like when they were, episode like 8 or 9, and 13 was the twist. Or they told them, like, they waited to tell them. So Kristen Bell and Mike Schur bring them into this room, and Kristen Bell was filming it. So you basically see Mike Schur, like, you see the 4 of them sitting there, and he's going through the twist at the end of season 1, and he tells the actors, like, oh, you're actually in the bad place. They even had no idea. So they kept it way under wraps because they didn't want it to get ruined. And yeah, it was really cool that they did that.
So yeah, first season is basically the whole setup, and then the twist for the audience. And then season 2 is essentially there's a few episodes where Michael, the demon, is trying to, or the Ted Danson character is trying to, well, actually, wait a minute, before we jump to season 2.
They get rebooted.
Yeah, but before we do that,
I mean,
let's pick a couple of favorite episodes from season 1, because let's see. I mean, we'll do it season by season, so I'm trying to look. I mean, we don't have to necessarily pick only one, but I'm trying to look through them because, I mean, I look at season 1 as just like a long movie. So
yeah,
I'm looking through.
And because it really touches in and gives you insight to all of their lives. Like, each one kind of has their own, where you realize who they are and what their life was before they died, and then you learn how they died. And so season 1 is a lot of setup.
Is first season where basically he says, I need to take a break. That's where he says, I need to take a break from teaching you. I just want to go out on a boat and read poetry, right? That's season 1. Yeah?
Yes.
Okay,
yeah.
That's my favorite episode. That's the one where Eleanor really starts to change in a very concrete way. So there's an episode because basically
that's episode 5, I think.
Oh, that's
category 55, emergency doomsday. Maybe that's that one. Where the other couple comes in, right?
Is that the same one? See, like I said, I just see it all as one. So I wasn't paying attention. The first season, one of the reasons I think it works so well for me is because I don't notice the episodes. They just one to the next. I don't even notice. I mean, obviously you see the credits, the show ends, it has the beginning. But I never noticed the episodes. It's just one long movie to me. And I just know the story is so good, it just keeps going. Whereas again, in season 2 and 3, I started to notice, okay, we're how many episodes in, but we'll get to that in a second. But yes, that one is my favorite one because Chidi has essentially been, because he's driven to help, he's been teaching her and teaching her and teaching her, and he needs a break, and they have this big blow up. Oh yeah, because that is when the couple are there. You're right. And he says, I just want to go on a boat in the middle of the lake and read poetry, and and then at the end of the episode, not maybe the end, but later on in the episode, there's a point where Eleanor says brings him out to a dock, and there's the boat, and he has a picnic basket, I think, and a book, and she's like, all right, go out and row your boat. And it's a selfless act. It's the first
Right.
real thing that you see of Eleanor doing something for somebody else. Because we've constantly gotten flashbacks, and will for most of the first 2 seasons, I would say. You get these frequent flashbacks showing Eleanor being extraordinarily selfish and mean and cruel. And this is an example where she is starting to actually think about somebody besides herself. And that, of course, is the beginning of, not the beginning of, but it's a very obvious sign that she is becoming a better person. So that would be my favorite of the first
And
season.
she hands him a card that says she realizes that he needs some space, and that she's been, that this hasn't been what he wanted heaven would be like for him. So she hands him a card that says "fork off, Eleanor," because they can't curse there. So, and they did a really good job with the substitutions for curse words, and it's you get the gist of what they're trying to say, but it's freaking hilarious how they curse in the show, because it's anything is shirt and bench and fork, and it's just deckhead. It's great, very funny.
Yep. Do you have any particular favorite moments of season 1?
I
mean, and the ending obviously is also a huge one. The
yes.
episode where they find out is fantastic.
Yeah.
But that's of course
Right.
because it's
That's
the twist
probably...
being revealed. So that's sort of automatic.
Yeah, that one's really good. I love this show. It's hard for me to really pick. I have a lot of I don't know if I have a favorite episode.
Okay, well, that's fine. You don't have to have one.
I think I just
So first season ends, everybody gets reset, they all get rebooted, their memories get erased, and the first couple episodes are, I think it's maybe the first 2 or 3 episodes. No, because Team Cockroach is the one where he basically gives up.
They team up with Michael.
The first 3 episodes are Michael trying to hide from Sean, who's essentially his boss. Yeah, they never show you any character who is ever presented, because they basically say that the good place is not really heaven, the bad place is not really hell, because no religion got it right. Every religion got little bits right. So there is never a god or a devil. There are just demons, and they never, do they actually say they're angels? I don't think they necessarily ever even call them angels, but they definitely say demons, which I find interesting. Yeah. They don't call them devils, they call them demons. So there are demons, and then there are good place people, which they don't have a name for, which I'm always kind of like, well, then why call them demons? But that's just more of a, I'd be curious why the reasoning behind that. I'm sure at some point there will be a book that comes out that explains all this stuff, because I'm sure there'll be that type of thing. But anyway, that's the first few episodes of season 2, is Michael finally gives up and realizes, okay, I need you guys to work with me to cover this up, because if my boss finds out, I'm dead, you're going to be tortured. And the way that they agree to it is they say, okay, but you have to take the ethics classes now that we're all taking. And Michael's like, well, what's the point? I'm a demon. It doesn't matter. And they're like, well, that's the deal or not. So he agrees. And then the rest of the season is essentially then Michael becoming a better person, which is my favorite episodes from that are the trolley problem and the one right after, which is Janet and Michael, because I really like Janet and Michael as 2 characters. Yeah. And that, and then the rest kind of blurs together. Then they go to the bad place. And then they get killed and put back on Earth. And that's where honestly, this time it started to lose me a little bit at the end of 2 and for some of 3. I don't really know why. I mean, I like the show. I love the show. I shouldn't say I like the show. I'd watch this before 100 other things in a second. But this time, the second season, after Jason Mantzoukas shows up, because I think he's hysterical, so I'll watch him in anything. After that, I felt like some of that stuff started to drag a little bit for me this time. I don't really know why. It just didn't seem as necessary. Maybe because I know where it's going. That's sort of the byproduct of it too, is because I know where it ends up.
Probably. Sure.
And it's not bad, because the judge shows up at the end of season 2. So there's still stuff I really like.
Yeah.
But yeah, some of it I'm kind of like, okay, I could probably do without a few of these episodes for season 2. But it's the trolley problem and the Janet and Michael episode are good enough. I really don't care. Those episodes are so good.
Yeah. Well,
Particularly the
probably
Charlie Brown
season
one.
3 is what you're struggling with, is when they go back to Earth. That happens in season 3.
Yeah, right. Because isn't it at the end? The end of season 2 is where they get put back, and then she goes and finds Chidi, right? At the very end of that, she says, "I think you're supposed to help me."
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. But like when they go to the bad place, like that episode, it's funny, but I don't need it.
Yeah.
That's what I mean. Is some of that stuff started to drag for me a little bit. Never to the point where I would necessarily skip it, but I think part of it is because season 1 and season 4 are so good that it sort of makes the middle kind of like, all right, let's get to that. But again, I'm not saying it's bad. I would never say anything, and nothing in this is bad. The writing is good all the way through, and there are great little moments there, like the medium place. Medium place is season 2, right? Or is that season 1?
No,
When's
it's
the
season
medium place?
1. They meet
okay.
Mindy in season 1, yeah.
Okay.
And it's recurring, but yeah, she's there season 1.
Okay. Oh yeah, because don't they dump Derek off on her in season 2? After Janet and him.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So season 2 is essentially then they're trying to figure out how to make it work with to pull off. Okay, now remind me, because see, I forgot this too. So what was the plan with Michael? Was just to fool him for long enough, and what was the end plan for that? What were they going to do if as working together? What was the idea? Just to delay him?
So he basically told them that he was going to get them into the good place, and then he realized he was just kind of like lying to them, because he realized there's no way to do that. Like, he doesn't know how to do that.
Right, because then he said maybe they'll take me too.
Yeah, they have to go to the bad place to get the pins to be able to go through the portal to go talk to the judge, because they wanted to talk to the judge to try to, say like, hey, we've improved. We don't deserve to go to the bad place. So that's why they had to go to the bad place, so they could get the pins to go through the portal to go to the judge's chambers.
Yeah, so there's basically a point where Michael starts to realize that maybe the system of points and how things are being done, that something is wrong about it. And that's when they then go to the judge when they get there, she gives them the test, right? So each of them gets a test.
No,
not yet. See, this is what I mean. Season 2 and 3 just blend together to me.
Yeah.
Okay, so explain season 2. I'm going to let you do, because I think you're going to be better at this than me. So I'll let you do season 2 and season 3. I'll let you explain those.
Well, you already did season 2. Season 2 was them teaming up with Michael, and basically getting the end of season 2 is them going to the judge and making their case. So they are put back on. They were basically saved from every instance to where they died. Michael went back and saved them, so they were able to become better. Season 3 is basically seeing them on Earth if they hadn't died, having a near-death experience. Maybe that will make them. They'll learn how to be better people. Basically, it's giving them a chance to be better people if they hadn't died. And then things aren't going right, so Michael keeps going down to Earth to kind of intervene and interfere, even though he's not supposed to. And that's
because he realizes that Eleanor and Chidi have to meet, right? That's the whole central.
Yeah, like
they have to at some point meet.
He realizes the four of them need to be together to make themselves better. Yeah.
And then season 3, okay, so they go back, and then in season 3 is when Michael realizes the point system is off, right? That is season 3.
Yes.
Okay.
Because they go and find Doug Forsett, who in the very beginning, he's like, they have this picture. Michael has this picture of this dude on the wall, that he says when Eleanor, he says, oh, you're in the good place. And she says, okay, well, which religion got it right? And he says, oh, every religion got about 5%, Buddhists, Hindu, got about 5%. They're like, but this guy, this Canadian dude did a whole bunch of mushrooms, and then he laid out like 95% of what happens when you die, that it's a whole point system. And like, that's why his picture's on the wall, because he knows, And so they go and they find him, and they realize that it has completely ruined his life, because he's so caught up on what will get him points and what will do good, that he's not living a life. Like, he's miserable. There's this little jerky asshole neighbor kid that like just terrorizes him and beats him up, and then he doesn't eat anything but radishes because they have like the least amount of like negative effect on the environment. So trying to live this way isn't good, and they realize that, like, whoa, wait a minute. And then what they end up, well, I'm skipping ahead a little bit, but they end up going to the good place, and they in like the mail room, and so they find his points, and his points aren't even good enough to get in the good place. And then they realize that there were nobody has gotten in what, like 500 years or something like that, something because like that, because life and Earth has gotten so complicated that the old point system doesn't work. And this isn't the good way to judge people. I know I skipped ahead a little bit. And in that one, probably one of my favorite one is when they die. So they go into Janet's void, and they all look like Janet. And I just have to like praise the actress who plays Janet, Darcy Carden, because it's her, but she's acting like everybody else. And that is probably one of my favorite episodes, because she freaking nails it. It is so funny how she does that. And like, she basically takes on, and she, like, when I listened to the podcast, like, she basically listened to her the other actors, like, she listened to their voices and their mannerisms. Like, she would be driving around. There was a story she told to where she was driving around in Hollywood, and she saw the actor who plays Chidi, and she was actually listening to like a tape of his voice, like as he was walking down the street. So like, she did such a good job. I mean, they all did, and they're all just amazing. But like, that episode's probably one of my favorites, just because it's hilarious.
Yeah, that is a very good episode. Yeah, that is probably one of the funnier ones. So then at the end of season 3, they essentially get back to the judge again, which is another kind of becomes a running gag that they just won't leave the judge alone. They keep making, these arguments to her, and, she kind of gets sort of sick of them, yet likes them. And they make this argument that what they need to do is prove that there's nothing special about them, that they aren't a fluke. And so the idea is that there will be 4 new humans who have died, and they will be put into a reconstructed neighborhood, which is basically the same one as from the first season. And that these 4 people will be chosen by the bad place, but they will be then helped or guided, or whatever you want to say, by the good place people. And so that then sets up season 4, where these 4 new people come in. One of them is very quickly revealed to be a demon, which is the workout demon, which is one of the funnier gags of the whole show, where there's a guy, one of the demons, essentially when Michael does the reboot, his idea is to keep Eleanor and Chidi from finding each other. And one of the ways he does this is Chidi and Eleanor were set up as soulmates in season 1. And so he decides to replace Chidi as a soulmate with this huge buff guy does he work in the mail service too? Isn't that
Who
what he
was
says?
I was going to say he was a mailman, which
Yes.
that was like her.
Eleanor has
her
a kink for
jam.
mailmen.
Yes.
So, and basically every time she starts to ask questions about what's going on, he tears his shirt off and says, you know what? I'll get back to you. I got to go to the gym. And he keeps saying it. And there's a point where Michael has his kind of main demons in a room, and the guy says something about going to the gym. And he says, wait a minute, how often are you telling her you're going to the gym? And he's like, I don't know, 6 or 7 times. And he says, why? And he says, because you told me to say, if she started asking questions, say I'm going to the gym. He's like, that's not the only thing you're supposed to say. And so it's this ridiculous thing where then he keeps tearing his shirt off. In fact, in that, he gets angry at Michael and tears his shirt off and says, I'm going to the gym, and storms out.
Exactly.
And so that's the demon that in the 4th season is revealed to be this very boring woman when she starts punching everybody out and tears the skin off. And then it's the guy underneath with no shirt on. And so they have these 4 humans, and they are... one of them is Chidi's ex, which then causes them to have to erase Chidi's memory because he won't be able to focus on... Because the whole idea was he was going to teach them ethics, just like he did with the first people. But this was his ex from Earth, and so he says, I'm not going to be able to focus on what I'm supposed to be doing, and I'll ruin the whole thing. And so they have to erase his memory, including memories of him and Eleanor falling in love at least a few times, I think, but at least one major time. And then he's reset, so he's essentially he becomes the 4th human when they throw the gym guy out. And so it's him, his ex Simone, who is a brain neurologist or neuroscientist who doesn't believe any of it's real, a gossip columnist named John. Is John his name?
John?
Yeah. And then Brent, who is the basically complete essence of toxic white male masculinity. The worst person you could possibly be outside of a serial killer, the worst person you'd ever want to hang out with for a long amount of time. Completely self-absorbed, sexist, racist. Well, I don't think they ever make him homophobic, but you just assume that he's probably afraid of gay people too, because why not? He hates everything else. And he very quickly becomes the biggest challenge of the group. Everybody else, they start to kind of figure out, I mean, Chidi and Simone, that were essentially good people anyway, so that's not all that difficult. You never really have any doubt about them. But John and Brent, even John, they get past him pretty quick, but Brent is the problem.
And they basically, so the bad place got to choose the subjects, and they basically chose them to torture the original group. John wrote all this terrible stuff about Tahani, so that was to torture her. Simone was meant to torture Chidi because that was his ex-girlfriend. And then so it's just it's
Jason doesn't get
they
somebody.
did that
Jason
on
has nobody torturing him. He's the only one who escapes without anybody torturing him. And it's probably because he's too doofy to even realize if somebody is well, actually no, they do give him the guy in the 2nd season. He's reboot. Paired with because when Jason shows up, I don't think we explained this necessarily all the way out. He's told he's a silent monk. And so he keeps his mouth shut to avoid giving away that he's not supposed to be there by playing this silent monk who says nothing. It drives Tahani crazy. And then he is paired with an actual, what is supposed to be an actual silent monk who never leaves his side and drives him crazy. But then once they get to the final season where the new humans come in, there really is nobody that is there to torture Jason. Everybody else has somebody who's almost a direct torture. And in fact, Brent is torturing not only them, but the other humans as well. So Brent is kind of the catch-all, worst of all types that you get.
So gross.
He's really bad. And that forms the middle is a lot of Brent jokes and how awful Brent is. And their different attempts to see if they can figure out some way to get him to move even a little bit into being a better person. And only at the very last minute do they even get that. And so that experiment then ends, and they are basically they present their case to the judge once again. And the judge basically says, okay, you're right. This system doesn't work. And so we're not going to use it anymore. So I'm just going to erase all of existence and we'll restart people. So they essentially win their case and then are told that everything is going to be destroyed. At which point they summon Timothy Oliphant to distract the judge, which is one of the most brilliant cameo guest stars there is. Where, I mean, he shows up in everything. He shows up in The Mandalorian. He shows up in this. He's everywhere. But the judge has a thing for him from watching Justified, and so that delays her destroying the universe long enough for them to explain that they are going to create a... not create a, but that they'll create a new series of tests that allows everybody to keep running the tests until they get better. And so essentially you would assume that everybody outside of maybe Hitler will eventually get to the good place. That's how it's kind of set up, that everybody gets to run through these tests over and over and over until they actually start to... So I guess in theory, even Hitler would eventually realize that, yeah, I maybe shouldn't have murdered 6 million people, you'd hope. But that's essentially everybody gets to rerun the tests as opposed to just dying with a point system. And that's the decision, is you go through and you have this vague memory, which is essentially your conscience or the little voice in the back of your head that tells you whether to do something right or wrong. And then you get to the good place. And so once they establish that system, the 4 of them are then granted access to the actual good place, which they then find out is not so great. So they get there, and everybody is essentially a zombie, like a completely over pleasure-centered zombie where they're just in paradise forever, and it ends up ruining you because when you have eternity and there's no end to the fun times, you just kind of vegetate. And so then the idea is, okay, we're going to add an exit to the good place, where once you're sick of being in paradise, then you walk through this portal and you finally actually end existence in the universe. They don't really necessarily say what's going to happen, but their existence ends somewhat, depending on how you look at it. And
the wave returns to the ocean.
Yeah. Which is one of the places that I have a major problem with this show. And this is probably just because this is me. So essentially, the 4 of them are there. And Jason and Janet, who got married way back in season 1, are together again. Tahani is in her mansion and hanging out with her sister and her parents, who are now much better people. That's one of the best things, is when Tahani's parents show up, her and her sister Camilla see them and they apologize, and they're much better because they've realized they were terrible parents.
Yes.
And then Eleanor and Chidi are together. And so then the end of the series is essentially, at what point are each of them going to, I don't know, commit suicide, whatever it is, go through the portal.
Basically. Yeah.
And so Jason goes first, sort of, but then doesn't, but then does. And then it is Chidi is next.
Well, no, Tahani realizes she's ready to leave, but she...
Oh, right, but she doesn't go through the portal.
Becomes an architect. Yeah, so she because she had this list of everything she wanted to do. And the show is so thoughtful in the things that they do. So like she has this huge list of, become a master carpenter, be all this. So you see her working with Nick Offerman, and he's, looking at this chair that she made and going through it and critiquing it. He's like, "Oh, I have nothing more to teach you." And it's just like they are so thoughtful in everything that they do, and every little snippet that it just like I love that he was the master carpenter, that was her teacher. Like, such a beautiful touch, I think. So she decides like, oh, I have this big list. I'm ready to go. I don't want to be here anymore, but I want to do something else. So she is going to learn how to be an architect to design the tests for people in the afterlife. So she's not necessarily, she doesn't go through the portal, but she's not in the neighborhood anymore. She's not in heaven anymore, I guess you could say.
Right. And then it's down to Eleanor and Chidi, and there's a point where Chidi says, "Okay, I'm ready to leave." And Eleanor tries to get him to stay, and then realizes that that's ethically terrible to make him stay because he doesn't want to. And I gotta be honest, this is the part where the show kind of, it loses me a bit, because if I'm Chidi, if it was you and me, I don't care how content I felt. I would never leave you to be miserable without me. That would be worse than being bored in paradise.
Thanks, honey.
You're welcome.
I feel
But
the same.
that's the one part of the show where I'm like, that doesn't make sense to me. I'm sorry, it doesn't, because he has to know how miserable she's going to be and how alone she's going to feel. And the other thing is, and this is what makes it worse to me, is I think she leaves I think they said 3 Baramies later, which is not in the scope. Baramy is how they measure time in the afterlife. It's a relatively short amount of Baramies compared to some of the other lengths. So if he had just stuck it out a little longer, then she would have been ready at the same time. That's the one thing where I'm like Chidi would not have done that. He would not have done it to me. I have a real hard time with him being okay leaving her there based on how he's been the whole show. I mean, I get why. I understand. Yeah. The show has to do that.
It's a show. Exactly.
Yeah, and they have to show her being sad and all the rest of it. I get it. But
and him leaving gave her the opportunity to realize, because she was fine with just, hanging out with him. But then she kind of realized what else she needed to do to be okay. Like at first she thought it was she needed to help Mindy. And then she realized like, oh, we're going to make, I want to, she goes to the judge and has her make Michael an actual human, because Michael wants to go, because he feels like he has like the tests, they dissolve the group of I guess the people who were like kind of oversaw like how they were going, but the system was working so well.
Council or something they call them?
Something. Yeah. So they basically disband that because everything was working great. So you did it. You fixed it. Good job. And so he felt lost, that he didn't really know what to do. And he was like, from the very beginning, he was obsessed with humans, even though he's a demon and he's supposed to hate them. Like in his office, he had all of this human stuff, a bowl of paper clips and, like all this stuff that is just random crap, but it was special to him. And so Eleanor goes to the judge and says, okay, this is what needs to happen. And you're going to be done with us from now on. We're not going to bug you anymore. And then they get to make Michael a human. So I think I get what you're saying, but that had to happen for the show, because it had to end to where she needed to kind of be on her own to realize like, okay, this is what I need to do. And now I'm at peace, and, I get it, but I think it just had to happen.
It bothers me.
I know.
One of the few things that bothers me. I think the thing with Michael is the perfect ending. That is the perfect ending.
Well,
I mean, that was.
But if Chidi didn't leave, then you're just going to have him and Eleanor just hanging out forever. They're never going to want to leave, so he had to.
Or this is how I would have written it, is that they get to a point of peace at the same time because they were true soulmates and their souls were linked. And so the two of them wake up one morning and look out at the sunrise on their balcony and look at each other and don't say anything, and then go and tell the group, and then they leave. They do all the stuff, the stuff with Michael and other, they can do all that stuff. Yeah. But
sure,
that is the one thing about the show that I feel like is incorrectly done, because Eleanor leaving first would have made more sense. And I get why Eleanor is the main character. That's why she has to do all the stuff. But Chidi leaving, knowing what it will do to her, especially because it already happened to her once when his mind got erased. That makes it even worse. So that's where, if I'm Chidi and I know the pain she already went through, I eat shit until she's ready to go. Because guess what? She already lost me once. Why would I willingly do that to her again? That's just me, though. I'm projecting. That's what I would do. Because guess what? No matter what, it's still fucking paradise. And you shut the fuck up until the two of you are ready to go together. However, that's just my view of the world, where I'm like, nope, I'm not going to saddle somebody with pain if I can avoid it. So my only real issue is that.
Kind of circles back to what her life and what she'd been through, because I mean, we didn't really touch on it, but you said her parents were just scumbags, but basically her, in the flashbacks we get, she was on her own and she didn't want any connection at all. Like I think she was emancipated from her parents when she was like 14. She lived on her own. If people from work wanted to go to the movies, okay, yeah, I'll meet you there. Like I'm not going to be responsible for your ticket, and I'm not going to, oh, but you want to buy my ticket. Well, then you're going to get the points on your credit card. So she ends up sitting away from everybody. Like she was so closed off and so like just on her own for so long that maybe she had to be alone to, like, you know, realize. I don't know. I get what you're saying.
Well, but then she like, has that breakdown when they're sitting there and she says, I was alone forever and I thought that's what I wanted, but it's not. Chidi would have already known that. Chidi would know that was, and all right, now I'm putting myself in a writer's position. I'm not a writer. I don't run shows. I don't know shit. So let's just establish it up front. Like I say every time I come up with one of these ideas. If I'm writing it, they're sitting there, they wake up, they look at each other, they realize, and she says, you know, I'm, or something about, you know, I don't, you know, I'm ready when you are. And he's like, oh, I've been ready for, I don't know, however many berries. And she says, well, then why didn't you leave? And he says, because you spent most of your life alone and I wasn't going to be another person who left you alone in your life. That's the line. And then they walk through together. That's how you do it, everybody, because that's what Chidi would have done. I'm sorry. I'm pretending I know more than the person who created the show. But in this case, I think I know more than the person who created the show. You fucked up Chidi. I'm sorry. He wouldn't have done that. I don't like it. Whatever.
Yeah.
I don't care that much because I understand the mechanics of a show and it does set up the things come after. And at least that wasn't the last thing that happened. I think it would bother me more if that was the end of the show. The fact that then they set up Michael and he goes down, and then when Eleanor goes through the portal, she becomes the voice in the back of the head of the guy who's going to throw out Michael's spam mail and throws it out. Her spirit, Tinkerbell, star, dust, lands on his shoulder. He takes the mail out and gives it to Michael, who's thrilled because anything human is thrilling to Michael. Therefore, even getting spam mail that is garbage to most people is delightful to him, and that's how the show ends. It's a great ending.
Yeah. So, because in the very beginning he said like he wants a membership card to something, or like a rewards card, and then that's what
he's always one punch away from finishing or whatever. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
So that's why I don't care that much, because that was the correct ending for the show. But it's never not going to bother me that Chidi left. I have such a problem with that because of all the stuff they went through and the fact that she got erased, or that he got erased the first time. And then he has to know that she saw him every day and had to pretend not to know him as he started to get involved with Simone again. So it's all this shit where it's like, Chidi, come on, man. You're not going to bail. You're not going to do this to this person who suffered, all this shit. You're not going to do that. Like I said, I'm getting hung up on one thing. I honestly don't care, though, because the final season is excellent. So it doesn't matter. But the fact that it bothers me tells you it's a good show. If it's a shit show, I don't care. Do whatever you want, because I don't care.
True.
The fact that I like the show is why it bothers me.
Yeah, that's true.
But it has but again, they clearly knew what the ending of the show was going to be. It was set up right from the beginning. All that stuff is seeded, like the thing about being human and getting the spam card. All that finishes out in the end. And, they don't actually tell you, even though they say going through the portal ends your existence, I don't know that that's really true, because they do become little sparky things that then make people seem to be better. So you never know, which is fine. I don't need that answer. So I like the fact that you're like, oh, you end your existence in the universe. Yeah, maybe. Or you become the voice in the back of the head for somebody else, which is, also a beautiful, wonderful thing. So It's a great show. Like I said, even though, like I said, the middle kind of dragged for me at parts this time, it doesn't matter because the first season and the last season are so good that honestly, that's the important part of a show. If you start really well and you end really well, it really doesn't matter what goes on in the middle, you know?
Right.
I love Frasier too, and it had a season or two that I'm like,
sure. Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Anything else you'd like to say about the show?
No, I just, and every time we watch it, like you said, I know I like it more than you do, but just like I said, the writing and the details. So like there was a point to where they were talking about the show Friends, and then Michael says something of like, oh, well, oh, they wouldn't get into heaven. Or first, I think he says, well, they would get into heaven, and then he singles all of them out and was like, oh no, they wouldn't get in. But Phoebe, of course, Phoebe would get in. So then when they finally do go to heaven, they have this what a Greek philosopher that was there. What was her name? Hypatia
of Athens or whatever. Or
there
Athenia
you go.
Or whatever.
So who plays her? Frickin' Lisa Kudrow, Phoebe from Friends. Like, so I, yes, I recognized her, but then this time I caught that he said like Phoebe would be in heaven, and sure enough, there's Phoebe in heaven. So it's like the layers of this show and the writing is so good. I don't know. I really love this show. I think it's forking fantastic.
I have to say too, I agree with you, the writing, because the ethical stuff, which I find really interesting, that's the most interesting stuff in the show for me, is all the philosophical ideas and all the different people. I mean, there's a couple of books that are mentioned which I'm going to read. I've got them written down. I want to read some of these books that I meant to do it the last time we watched it and I forgot to. This time I actually was taking notes on the books that Chidi's bringing up because I want to read them. I'm actually interested in a lot of that stuff. And like the trolley problem, which is something I was very familiar with, and it's one of the classics of philosophy and ethics, is that episode is so great where, it is the actual philosophical ideas. So it's presented in a way that's entertaining and funny when they keep running people over, and it's basically like a gore film where just blood and bits are getting showered all over them. Yeah. But it's in service of an actual ethical idea, which is, well, what do you do? How do ethics change when you don't know people? Do you still save them? When you do know people, do you save them? When do you do harm or not? That type of thing.
Right.
There's a lot of that in here that I think otherwise most people probably would have no exposure to or no interest in. Because, if you read I may read these books and fall asleep. I mean, ethics is not the most exciting topic in the world. They don't make movies with Tom Hanks storming the beach of the ethics country to rescue moral philosophers. That's what you do with more exciting material like World Wars. So it is not necessarily stuff that you would think you could make a whole entertaining comedy around. And yet this show did. So any complaints I have are honestly can go fuck themselves because you don't see this type of show very often. So who cares if I found a couple of episodes of season 2 to be slow? It's a show about morality and ethics that's genuinely funny and actually teaches people something. And that something is maybe you should be nice to other people.
Exactly.
So who gives a shit if I'm not,
And they mix in funny, like funny, stupid shit and fart jokes. And, so it's not like it doesn't feel heavy. Yes, you're learning about ethics, but then it doesn't beat you over the head with it. And it's also funny and you laugh.
Yes.
And this show does it to me like Schitt's Creek did, where there were a few moments where I am in tears bawling and then I start to laugh like I feel like a fucking maniac when I watch this show because I'm like all the emotions, like crying and laughing within a couple seconds of each other. But it's great.
A show that has a bad Janet that constantly farts as the answer to many questions. and as kind of we didn't even get into the idea of the bad Janet
No.
thing.
Oh, we didn't.
There's a ton of really neat stuff from this that is, like I said, my criticisms are nothing because I would still watch this over nearly anything else. I mean, this is such a smart show that most people should watch it.
Yeah.
And again, I'm still astonished that this show could be this smart and this good at the same time.
Yep.
You don't see it for the same way that we talk about when we talked about Schitt's Creek, the idea of how equality and tolerance are baked in and you don't think about them, but they are always there in the way that people react to each other. It's the same thing here where the ethics and morality stuff, even when they're not necessarily showing you a chalkboard where Chidi is pointing out the philosophy of it, it's still all there. This entire thing is about the idea of how we interact with each other and who is what worth is and what actual worth is and how, trying to judge somebody by one or two actions is a bad idea, that it doesn't tell you the totality. I mean, the whole thing with Brent that gets wrapped up, and it's one of the great things in the show that the show is pointing out, is Brent is terrible and terrible and terrible. And then at the very moment where the experiment is going to end, he finally cracks and starts to apologize to Chidi, and then everything freezes because the experiment ends. And so when they look at all the points of the four people, everybody improved but him. He was still in the negative. And Sean, who's the bad place manager, says, well, there you go. He didn't improve. So they lose. And Michael's point is he did improve. He may not have gone into the positives, but at the end he went from negative 50 whatever % in point totals to -1. And that's because you can't judge somebody by all their decisions up to now, because the next day they could become a better person, and that's the point. Stuff like that is not stuff you see very often. And the show does it better than, I've never even seen another show that gets into ethics like this. There probably are some, but I doubt they're anywhere near at this level. Right. So just for that reason, it should be seen by everybody. I mean, this is unlike Parks, which struggled with its ratings and is a great show. This show, right from the beginning, I think was recognized as great. I mean, I remember the reviews were always really good. The ratings were good. So this one at least has been properly recognized for being what it is. Unlike a lot of shows that you end up finding out, oh, these were actually really smart shows and nobody ever saw them unless they aired them in other countries where they have more respect for good material, because we're in the United States, we're all dummies. But everywhere else, they kind of like, oh yeah, you can have intelligent stuff and people will watch it. Here we're like, no. So I'm happy it's looked at the way it is. And if anybody hasn't seen it, we've now spoiled it for you. But honestly, we really haven't, because it doesn't matter. We've watched it now, 5 times, 6 times? Something like that.
Yeah, maybe 5, yeah.
Yeah. It never isn't good. It's never not funny. It doesn't matter when you know, because then actually this is a show where knowing might actually be better, because then you get to really look at all the things that are going on. You get to notice all the little details. Like this time I was paying attention to all the word play in the background, all the gags on names, Beignet and the Jets and stuff like that.
Yes.
I noticed a lot more of that.
Joni and the tchotchkes.
Sushi and the Banshees.
Sean is there. Yes. Yeah. And there's so much of that stuff. Yeah. So much of that.
I know the writers, that was one of their big things, was they like, and some of this was in Parks, because some of the same people were involved, is this idea that they like to do puns. They like to have funny word things. So that's all over the place.
And a lot of the characters too, like there's a running gag with there's a bad place employee, Glenn, where everybody is so mean to him. And it's always just like, he doesn't even need to say anything. And it's, shut up, Glenn. That's one of the main writers on the show. Joe Mandy, who's one of the writers, is the voice of the lava monster, Todd. So they pull in a lot of these people that aren't really actors. And one more thing I wanted to say about, I was going to mention this. I think on the second episode, Mark Evan Jackson, who plays Sean, he had mentioned that he, on Brooklyn Nine-Nine, he was on that show, but he auditioned for I don't know who, because I've never seen that show, so I wasn't familiar with the character he said. But he said that his agent got this email from Mike Schur that, because Mark Evan Jackson, if you're not familiar with him, he's very like, he even calls himself like C-3PO. He's very like, he sounds like a robot, and he's just very, so he wasn't right for that role.
I'd like to know why this guy looks like Beaker. Beep, 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 beep,
beep. Exactly. That guy from Parks. The lawyer from Parks is Mark Evan Jackson. Exactly. So Mike Schur took the time to write an email to his agent and say, hey, you know what? We couldn't have asked him to do any better. We couldn't have asked for anything more. It's just not the direction that we wanted to go. Like, he's not the idea we had for this character. But like, just he did such a good job. So the fact that he takes the time to do stuff like that, because when in this industry would I don't think that's very common for somebody to do that. But then they also said that, and with one of the writers in the episodes, they have like basically this folder. So like the actress that plays Vicky, or the real Eleanor, which we didn't even get into, Another Way to Torture Them, she originally auditioned for Tahani, and so she wasn't what they were looking for, but they basically put her in this folder. I think it's called like good for something or so it's not necessarily the role you auditioned for, but we're going to use you for something. And and it's like the fact that they just don't give up on people, and they remember people, and they had the same kind of thing with like jokes, whereas like, oh, we had to cut this joke because of time, or maybe it didn't fit or whatever. They put it in something they call the candy bag, and maybe they'll revisit it, and it's just like, it's so thoughtful, and so everything is just so thought out that it's just, yeah, I really appreciate the show, and I think it's great.
Well, I don't know that there's much else to say. Go watch it. I mean, basically, this has been an hour and 12 minutes of you should go watch it. So go watch it.
Go watch it.
And that's it. That's all we have to say, is it's really good. So, Sam, thanks for coming on and doing this. I knew that this was going to be a fun one, because I know that you've been listening to the show and you love this show, or the podcast, sorry, not the show. And then
yeah.
So
yeah, and if you are a fan of that show, I definitely recommend listening to that podcast, because they, with the show, like, as much as I like the show, they did a really good job with the podcast as well. And I am a fan of finding out the little, like, the behind the scene thing. And so if you like that stuff as well, you should definitely listen to it, because there's a lot of behind the scenes. And I really like that they talk to a lot of different people, a lot of different aspects. And that's another thing that they, that I think this show, they appreciate everybody who was involved. They couldn't have done it, so they talked to the costume designer. They talked to all these different things, because there's so many different layers of what goes into the show. And if you're interested in the Easter eggs and details that you don't really know about, I would listen to the podcast.
What's it called again? What's the title? Did you say what the title is?
I think it's just called the let me look. It's called like The Good Place. The Good Place, the podcast.
Okay.
Is what it's called. And it's like, it has the NBC logo on it. Like, and every time they curse in the podcast, they dub over with Kristen Bell saying either fork or shirt, which is fucking hilarious, because it's so out of place, but it works. So yeah, it's great.
So yeah, go watch it. It's a great show.
Go watch
I only wish it was available more broadly than Netflix. So I'm sorry, you'll have to subscribe to Netflix, or rent it on Amazon. It's probably cheap enough. I mean, it's usually, I don't know how seasons are on. So that's the only bad thing, is I wish it was it. I don't even think it's on the Peacock app. Because I was going to say you might be able to check. It might be. I wish it was more accessible, because I know there are people who are like, well, I'm not paying for Netflix, and I don't blame you. I've had enough of paying for 80 streaming services too, so I'm not telling you to subscribe to something and spend more money. However, you could do a free trial, watch it, and then cancel. That's always an option. I'm not saying that's ethically something you should do. Chidi might have a problem with it, but I don't, because they're making plenty of money from other people. So, yeah, it's on Netflix. Check the Peacock app in case it's on there. Otherwise, you could rent it from almost anywhere, and I think for almost anybody it would be worth a rental, because it really is that good a show, especially if you like stuff like Schitt's Creek, Parks and Rec, that type of show. You're pretty much a baked-in audience for something like this. And again, it's not often you see a really well-done, complete, beginning-to-end comedy that is genuinely funny and is centered around the idea of ethics, morality, and how people treat each other. So just for that reason, you should watch it. But also, it's a really funny show. So Sam, thanks for doing this.
Thank you.
And for everybody else, we'll talk to you next week. Lando should be back. Or not. If not, maybe we'll be reviewing another show. Who the fuck knows? Have a nice weekend.
Bye.
Visit OzoneNightmare.com to subscribe to new episodes, browse through our back catalog, or to find links to support the show. Follow @OzoneNightmare on Twitter for the latest episode postings and other show information. If 280 characters just isn't enough, you can always email us, theozonenightmare@gmail.com. The opening theme for the show is provided by Heartbeat Hero. The closing theme is provided by Ogre. Please visit and support these artists using the links in the show notes for each episode.